Good morning, it's daylight savings. Was the other day. Now it's that Tuesday. Tired. Tired. Body still adjusting to this new time frame. If you were waking up at 7, now you wake up at 8. Boom. Still tired. A little tougher to go to sleep. Body doesn't recognize it. Why do they want you feeding into the loop of daylight savings? Have you ever asked yourself that? Why does the man want you saving daylight in the winter or summertime? Does the man want to mess up your clock? Is he messing up your chakras? You ever consider that one? Whew, I bet not. I'm kidding, I don't buy into a lot of that the man stuff. The man wants to keep you down, weak, whatever. I think a lot of people are just kind of idiots. They keep themselves in bad situations. They keep themselves in just these silly situations. They put themselves in these spots. It's popped up for me recently, that Caleb Hammer show or whatever. And these people will go on there with all sorts of just crippling debt that they racked up in the stupidest fucking way you've ever heard of in your entire life. And my heart goes out. My heart goes out because some people, they don't have what it takes to, like, I don't know, like process buy now, pay later situations, or like just short term, long term, like a lot of financial insecurity in America, at least, is people just unable to process like short term, long term payoffs of like, I spend money now, or the flip side, I invest money now and I'll have more back later, or I'll spend money now, or I'll spend money later, but now I'm paying interest on it, so it's costing me way more, even though I spent less money now. It leads to a lot of tragic situations. Europeans, if you're an idiot, but you're European, you probably have it actually a lot better than you do in America, because they don't like use credit in Europe by and large. And obviously they have a lot more like social systems to kind of protect you, right? That they have free healthcare in much of Europe. Um, there's some stuff like that going on over there. So I think if you're in America, you have access to like the best of the best. You have access to the best doctors. You have access to Kona coffee beans from Hawaii. We ran out. I'm drinking now the normal stuff again, and let me tell you, to fall off. You have access to the top level sports leagues, everything but soccer in the world. But soccer doesn't count. I played soccer for years of my life. Those games, any real game that can end in a 0-0 draw, dude, it's got a ways to go. In America, you have access to elite cuisines, all sorts of stuff. You can buy whatever you like. Mansions. A lot of the richest enclaves on the planet are in America. But you got to be able to afford it. You got to not be an idiot. There's a theory of history, the great man theory of history, which states that only a few people, like a small group of men, and I might be misphrasing this theory, but a small group of men throughout the history of the world are responsible for like 90% of the juice, the movement. When you look back at history, there are a short list of guys who are responsible for how our earth has come to be. You have Jesus, right? That's a big one. Son of God. But even if you don't believe he was the Son of God, there's a book about him called the Holy Bible that millions of people, billions of people around the world believe and take very seriously. And so whatever he was, Jesus inspired a lot of people. And thanks to him, the world is definitely different than it would have been without him. That's just one man kind of going on his mission, doing his thing. You've Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, Mongolian warlord. Um, Different sort of character than Jesus, but that's all right. You know, a lot of great men in history are different men. They just were inspired in their unique ways. Genghis Khan conquered much of the world at that time. And I think it was over the course of a couple generations. I'm not sure it was Genghis himself who did all the riding from Mongolia down through China, all the way out towards Turkey and Russia. Um, but when you had the European Renaissance, right? When you had, maybe it wasn't even the Renaissance, but you had maybe like the printing press, or there were some really key inventions that were brought, that were made at the time that the Mongols controlled Russia, the Golden Horde Mongols. And so Russia ended up cut off from a lot of the rest of Europe at that time. There was like a curtain, you know, because Europe didn't want to fuck with these crazy guys on horseback with arrows. And so you end up in a situation where Russia, despite having many European aspects, especially on the, you know, the European side, like Moscow, St. Petersburg, um, developed really differently than the rest of Europe. It wasn't exposed to those same influences. It was sheltered, it was cut off, and really, that's the doing of Genghis Khan. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, another one of these great men of history, crossed the Rubicon, eventually died. But the Roman Empire, and so much of that, much of the like Roman or slash British Europe, and maybe not British, but if Caesar conquered all the way up to that wall in like England, Scotland, laid the foundations, definitely, I guess, laid the foundations for everything that happened in Europe afterwards. You combine his influence with Genghis Khan much later, and you have one part of Europe which has, you know, more of a Roman cultural history, Catholic, people believe in Jesus Christ. And then you have the other side, uh, you know, Russia and the Mongols, and it's just a little different. It's a little different, the Eastern European. And I don't know how far the Mongols went. I don't know if Russia was the only country impacted by that exists in the modern day. I imagine maybe Ukraine might have been in the mix there as well. Maybe some of those, like Prague, or Prague's a city. Is that Czechoslovakia? I don't know. I used to know my geography far better than I do now because that stuff is interesting. So nowadays, it seems like a lot of great men of history. America's a place that's very well positioned for them because if you're smart and you can move quickly, you can succeed rapidly in America. So some modern day candidates might be a guy like Elon, who's just had his hands in so many projects. A lot of people, you know, shit on him because they don't agree with his politics. That's fine, but the guy's had his hands in so many revolutionary things. I think it's a little foolish not to look at that and say, wait, maybe he is actually smart. Maybe he actually does know what he's doing and talking about in the domains of expertise, which he has. Bezos, sort of another guy. Zuckerberg, sort of another guy. Makes you think who is going to be known as, in 500 years or 1,000 years, the kind of movers and shakers, the great men of history theory. I guess a more recent one of the first American great men of history, besides George Washington, because he put America on the map, literally. Good guy. You could say maybe John Rockefeller and Standard Oil, because many of the oil companies, like I think Exxon is, or Marathon could be too, maybe both of them are, but a lot of these global oil companies that much of the world relies on today, infrastructure-wise, were subsidiaries of the Standard Oil Trust, which was a monopoly, which was broken up, which was created by John Rockefeller, who is a guy, the son of a shopkeeper in Ohio or something like that. One thing, let's stop naming anecdotes, but one thing that sets these guys apart uniquely is these guys are just total forces of nature, every single one of them. Doesn't really matter the circumstance. You could say, maybe there's a great man history watching this video. There's only a couple of them in history, so maybe not. It's all right. But these people, I think, are just wired different. Adventurers to the core. Someone who the adventure can never be taken out of. And what do I mean by adventure? Because I doubt a lot of these folks actually go on vacations very much. They're trying to build something and expand to new horizons. Genghis Khan, expanding across the entire world from, Mongolia, where his people had never left, the Mongols, and expands them across the entire world, or at least sets that precedent so that others could follow it. Alexander the Great, great conqueror, Julius Caesar. So a lot of these early guys were great conquerors, expanding the frontiers and horizons of their nations. Jesus was not a conqueror, famously peaceful guy. He was a pioneer of faith. He was expanding the faith of the people. He was helping the people see the world in a different way. Look for the kingdom of heaven. That's a whole nother concept. Say, these guys all have it wrong. Actually, what we're going to do is this. So he was very powerful. He was a very powerful marketer, really, before marketing was a thing, before like ads or whatever. So there's no newspaper back then. I don't know if advertising was really an industry before even the written word, but Jesus said, yeah, I'm advertising God, baby. I'm advertising good tenants. So that's a fascinating one. He might be the most fascinating great man in history, because pretty much everyone else was like a huge, like the leader of a country or a businessman. Very different in that case, But by that context, I won't leave him out. Muhammad also shaped a lot of history. I'm not Islamic, and I couldn't pretend to let you know of the doctrines or whatever. But if we're talking about great man history theory, without that guy coming to the, I think, realization that he was a prophet, and I could be wrong, let me know if I'm wrong, but however that happened, now you have, I believe, the religion Islam that has the most practitioners worldwide. If you look at the Middle East and Africa, it's up there. It's definitely up there. And the caliphates, and there is this great Islamic empire that went even up into Spain. So I guess that makes two like religious great men of history who we know existed. But these people had that adventurous soul and that adventurous spirit, didn't they? Even the ones today are builders. You look at Elon, and he's like, yeah, we should go to Mars. We should actually do something about it. And has somehow pulled all sorts of strings from left and right and center to attempt to make it to a different planet. Go to the moon first. These are guys who are looking for new horizons perpetually. And many folks stay bound within this small realm of my day job and my promotion and what I do. And even I, as someone who likes to life max and adventure max, or at least attempts to, I know people better than me at doing that. And hell, some of these great men of history, they have that fire, that motor, that just goes way beyond the scope of what most people have ever put on their plates. That's fine, that's all right. Not everyone's gonna be like that, but adventure still exists in the modern day. You actually can do great things. Most of us don't have the identity naturally that it takes to do that. Most of us need to develop that sort of thing over time. I just sat on something sharp. It hurts. I don't know what it is, some kind of leaf. But most of us need to develop the identity it takes to do something truly consequential and meaningful. And ultimately, the most consequential and meaningful thing you can do in your life is probably just have a nice, happy family. and contribute positively to your community. We don't need to all be big time movers and shakers, but don't lose the spirit of play, baby. Don't lose the spirit of doing some good in the world, building something new. You're an adventurer too if you see an empty lot in your town and you say, we could use a nice little garden or park here. And you've just created a new horizon, a new frontier, a new thing to explore for the next generation to leave behind, just like Genghis Khan left behind the Mongol Empire, but at a much smaller and more peaceful scale. That's what you've done if you've built a little community garden, whatever. So adventure, even though much of it can be about exploration and variety and these cool things, can also be something very local you do. It can also be something that you want to change with the world, that you want to rewrite some pre-existing biases or opinions of the way things work, even in your small circle, even if your small group. You know, these are things that you can do. I would argue in a strange way that a guy who's at his computer, if he's building a project that he thinks can have some utility to folks across the world, in a way, this man is an intrepid adventurer, despite never leaving his room, because he's seen a new horizon or frontier that does not exist in the digital space, and he's attempted to create it so that others may explore it too. Just like Americans, when we first discovered America, had the concept of manifest destiny, and they walked the Oregon Trail to go settle out west, even though it's safer to do it on your computer, right? I think that computer guy could also use a little real life adventure too, and in the vast majority of circumstances, but that's neither here nor there. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the concept of adventure. We're talking about the great man of history. We're talking about the fact that even though it kind of feels small to be one human at any given point, like what can you impact, you know? They say like, oh, your vote matters, and it does. It matters that the collective people, the collective group of people believe that they should vote. That's what really matters. So, if you reduce your power by believing, oh, well, I only have one vote, or I only have one whatever, well, yeah, your power is reduced immensely. But if you expand your horizons, if you expand what you believe you're capable of, into these much larger domains of, well, over a long period of time, I can shift this and that and blah, 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 blah. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day. These great men of history didn't jump out of the womb and say, I'm going to conquer the known world today, or I'm going to start a new religion today, or I'm going to start one of the largest companies ever, and we're going to go to Mars today. It's not how it works, but it starts with an inkling. It starts with this idea in the head of this vast unexplored horizon, and then it's just that pull, that constant daily action towards that longer term purpose. The purpose is what locks it all in. I couldn't tell you about Genghis Khan's purpose or his specific motivations or whatever, but the purpose is what takes these great men from, you know, a dreamer or a thinker or a guy who had an idea once, and transmutes him into, boom, somebody who does miraculous, world-shaping things that the world we live in today is directly responsible. Like the world we live in today is directly downstream of the decisions these guys made. I'm gonna name another one. It just came to mind. I can't believe I forgot about him. Abe Lincoln. Abe Lincoln, look at that guy. We might still have slavery. I don't think we would still have slavery if not for Abe Lincoln, but he was the guy to stop it. I think we would have stopped it eventually, but Abe was like, no, we're doing that. Or we may not have stopped it, and we may have actually been a split United States. Think about that. If there was no great man of history, Abe Lincoln, at that time, there may have been a northern U.S. and a southern U.S. by under two different flags, with two different rule sets. And even in that southern U.S., I don't necessarily think that slavery would still be around today, just because look at the way the rest of the world has developed. The last country to shut it down was Brazil many years later on an official basis. I'm sure there's still many poor countries that still have little slave situations going on. We don't like that. But it would have been three countries: Canada, northern U.S., southern U.S. And so these are the massive impacts that you can have. Abe was like, no, I have a vision. We are going to be one U.S. We were one already, but we are going to be one. We're going to do no slaves in this thing. He got killed for it. But his position as a great man was solidified forever. By the way, that guy ran for office like 800,000 times before finally winning anything. Because he was dogged in his pursuit. Because he said, I have a purpose and a great idea, and I'm going to just, gonna do it. Reading about such interesting men, learning their histories, fascinating. Because it could be any one of us. We all know in our lives somewhere, you've even maybe heard of a guy. Maybe he's a guy who just lives in your neighborhood, but mover and shaker. There's this guy from my hometown. Not gonna get into detail, but his name's Clay. But Clay just ended up like buying a bunch of local businesses, movie theater. It was a historic movie theater too, a cool place. Not one of those big box AMCs. And I'm sure they've struggled tremendously since COVID, but like that dude probably kept the lights on in that place for 10 years extra than it would have been otherwise. And they've had some big names. Like when that, I guess here's a little minor great man theory, Jackie Robinson. But Jackie Robinson movie came out. He's the first black baseball player in the major leagues, right? In the MLB. It's the first African American MLB player in 1942, I want to say. And they actually showed the movie in the picture house, and they brought in one of his teammates who was an old man, but he spoke either before or after the movie about like, you know, just I guess what the movie was like when it happened, because the guy was his teammate. He's speaking about it in real life, blah 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 blah. Fascinating. So Jackie Robinson, without him, he was the first one, right? But another world shifter, because now you look at the MLB, you have people from everywhere competing. If you're at the highest level of baseball, you can compete in the MLB nowadays. That's the way it is. So think about the purpose, the mission, the vision that you have going on somewhere in your head. The ship may have sailed on being a famous warlord, may have sailed. We don't know what the future holds. But if there's that purpose and that vision, there's always a grand quest, a grand overarching adventure. Like Odysseus, he just wanted to come home to his family and kids, but conquer Troy, go home, ends up being a fantastic, amazing journey full of trials and hardships, but also a story that people tell many years later, even though it never happened. On the adventure, there's always setbacks, trials, hardships. It's not just a vacation to a resort, all right? It's the ups and downs, baby. It's living in it. But think about the impact, the change you can make in your domain, the thing that you have in your mind if you actually set yourself to it. One great man or woman, and I've been saying man because it's called the great man theory, but one great man or woman could change it all, provided the right inputs over a long period of time. So just think about that.